Aviation disasters are rare, but when they happen, the consequences can be devastating. Some crashes go beyond mechanical failure or pilot error. They reveal haunting final moments, unimaginable suffering, or eerie circumstances. These are the most disturbing plane crash deaths of all time, where tragedy struck in the most harrowing ways imaginable. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 left Tokyo's Haneda Airport for what was supposed to be a short and uneventful flight to Osaka. It was a routine domestic trip, something the airline had done countless times before without incident. The aircraft, a Boeing 747SR, was a specially modified version of the jumbo jet designed for short-haul, high-capacity flights within Japan. On board were 524 people, mostly families returning home, business travelers heading to meetings, and a dedicated crew guiding them through what should have been a simple journey from point A to point B. But about 12 minutes after takeoff, the ordinary became unthinkable. At 6:24 p.m., a loud bang shattered the usual hum of the engines and the relative calm of the cabin. The rear pressure bulkhead, an essential structural component that keeps the aircraft pressurized at altitude, had suddenly failed. What followed was an explosive decompression that tore through the tail of the aircraft. In an instant, the vertical stabilizer, essentially the plane's steering fin, was ripped clean off. To make matters worse, the explosion severed all 4 of the plane's hydraulic systems, the systems responsible for moving the control surfaces. In simple terms, the plane had no way to steer or stabilize itself. The root cause of the disaster traced back to a repair made 7 years earlier, after the plane had suffered a tail strike upon landing. The bulkhead had been improperly repaired by using a single row of rivets instead of the required double row. This flawed fix created a weak point in the structure. For years, it silently endured the stress of repeated pressurization cycles until that fateful evening when it finally gave way. With the aircraft severely crippled, the flight crew, led by Captain Masami Takahama, faced an almost impossible situation. Deprived of traditional flight controls, they attempted to steer using nothing but engine thrust, powering up one side to turn and easing off the other to adjust direction. This technique, known as differential thrust control, is extraordinarily difficult and rarely practiced outside of simulators. But somehow, they managed to keep the aircraft flying, barely, for another 32 minutes. Their efforts were nothing short of heroic, showcasing remarkable skill, discipline, and composure under unimaginable pressure. During those 32 minutes, the aircraft flew in wild, looping patterns over the mountainous terrain of central Japan. Air traffic control remained in contact with the crew, though the situation remained dire. Fighter jets were scrambled and caught glimpses of the struggling jumbo jet, but they were unable to assist. Inside the cabin, chaos reigned. The plane was violently shaking, pitching and rolling unpredictably, and many passengers understood that the situation was desperate. Some began writing farewell letters to loved ones, scrawling notes on air sickness bags, tray tables, and whatever paper they could find. At 6:56 p.m., the aircraft could no longer sustain flight. It crashed into the rugged face of Mount Takamagahara in the Ueno area of Gunma Prefecture. The impact was catastrophic. Of the 524 people on board, only 4 survived, all women seated near the rear of the plane. Miraculously, one of them was a 12-year-old girl. Rescue operations were hampered by communication breakdowns and the challenging terrain. Tragically, the delay meant that several passengers who might have survived the crash succumbed to their injuries before help could arrive. The crash of Flight 123 remains the deadliest single-aircraft disaster in aviation history. It left an indelible mark on Japan and the global aviation community. Boeing eventually took responsibility for the flawed repair guidelines that contributed to the disaster. The tragedy prompted sweeping reforms in aircraft maintenance protocols, repair certification processes, and emergency response coordination. To this day, the crash is remembered not only for its massive loss of life, but for the extraordinary efforts of a flight crew who fought to the very end to save their passengers. It stands as a powerful reminder that in aviation, every detail matters, and that the smallest oversight can lead to the most devastating consequences. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, heading for Beijing on what was supposed to be a routine red-eye flight. It was a quiet night with 239 people on board, passengers and crew settling in for the journey ahead. The plane, a Boeing 777, was one of the most reliable aircraft in the skies. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then, about 38 minutes after takeoff, the flight simply disappeared. At first, air traffic control lost contact. Not entirely unusual. Sometimes communications dip, but this wasn't just a blip. The plane's transponder, which communicates with radar systems, had gone dark. One moment it was there. The next, it was off the grid. As authorities scrambled, it was discovered that the aircraft had made a sharp left turn, doubling back over the Malaysian peninsula. From there, it veered off its flight path entirely, heading southwest into the vast emptiness of the southern Indian Ocean. What followed was one of the largest and most expensive search efforts in aviation history. Multiple countries joined the hunt. Ships, planes, satellites, all combed through thousands of square miles of ocean. But despite all the tech and teamwork, MH370 seemed to have vanished without a trace. For weeks, then months, the world waited. Families clung to hope, investigators chased every lead, and theories began to swirl. Some debris eventually washed up, parts of a wing, some internal components, found on remote beaches in places like Reunion Island and the coast of Africa. These fragments confirmed one thing: MH370 had crashed. But where exactly and why remained maddeningly unclear. Satellite data suggested the plane had flown for hours after contact was lost, deep into the Indian Ocean, far from any radar or rescue. With no black box, no clear wreckage, and no final communication from the cockpit, the theories came fast. Was it a hijacking? A mechanical failure? A deliberate act? Everyone from aviation experts to conspiracy theorists weighed in. The Malaysian government and international investigators released reports, but no theory could be proven beyond doubt. The mystery stayed locked beneath the waves. To this day, the disappearance of MH370 is one of aviation's greatest enigmas. It sparked worldwide debate on aircraft tracking, leading to changes in how planes are monitored over oceans. But it also left behind heartbreak for the families who never got closure and for the public still wondering how a massive commercial aircraft could simply vanish in the 21st century. It's a haunting reminder that even with all our modern technology, the world can still keep its secrets. And somewhere, deep in the ocean's silence, MH370 waits, its story still unfinished. On March 24, 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525 was on its way from Barcelona to Dusseldorf. It seemed like any other routine flight, with passengers relaxing in their seats and the crew going through their usual pre-flight procedures. But the tragic events that followed would forever change the airline industry. The plane, an Airbus A320, was carrying 150 people when it suddenly crashed into the French Alps. The cause? A deliberate act by the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz. Here's where things take a chilling turn. When the captain briefly left the cockpit, Lubitz locked him out. The cockpit door was reinforced, making it impossible for the captain to regain access. Inside, Lubitz made a devastating decision. Rather than follow standard procedure, he intentionally set the autopilot to descend rapidly, sending the plane toward the mountains below. The cockpit voice recorder captured the captain's desperate attempts to re-enter, but Lubitz remained silent, and the plane continued its terrifying descent. The sound of the captain's frantic efforts to break the door open was captured on the recording, along with the unmistakable noise of the plane's fatal plunge. It was an unimaginable turn of events that no one could have predicted. What made this situation even more shocking was that Lubitz had a history of mental health issues. including depression, which he had kept hidden from his employer. Investigators later found that he had sought treatment for these issues and had even been deemed unfit to fly on some occasions, but he had continued to work as a pilot. It became clear that he had been struggling privately with these issues, and tragically that led to this fatal decision. Lubitz's actions raised uncomfortable questions about the role of mental health in aviation safety, particularly the extent to which employers are responsible for ensuring that their employees are fit to fly. The Germanwings crash sent shockwaves throughout the aviation community, leaving everyone from industry experts to the public grappling with the implications of such a senseless act. In the aftermath of the crash, the aviation world was shaken to its core. The incident prompted immediate changes in airline policies, most notably the implementation of the two-person rule. This new rule mandates that at least 2 crew members must be present in the cockpit at all times, whether it's the captain and co-pilot or the co-pilot and a flight attendant. The hope was that this would prevent something like this from ever happening again, ensuring that no one could be left alone in the cockpit with the ability to make such a tragic decision. The Germanwings crash left a lasting mark on the aviation community and raised questions about mental health awareness, pilot screening, and the responsibility of employers to ensure their staff is fit for duty. The tragedy is a stark reminder of how important it is to address mental health issues, particularly in high-stakes professions like aviation, where the safety of others is in the hands of one person. The crash also highlighted the need for better systems of support for those dealing with mental health challenges, especially when those individuals hold jobs that could impact the lives of hundreds of people at a time. In the end, the crash claimed the lives of all 150 people on board, leaving families and loved ones devastated. While changes were made in the wake of the incident, it's a painful reminder that sometimes even the most routine of flights can take an unimaginable turn. The Germanwings tragedy remains one of the most heart-wrenching moments in aviation history, and its lessons continue to shape the industry to this day. The Tenerife airport disaster, which took place on March 27, 1977, remains the deadliest aviation accident in history, a title no one ever wants to hold. It happened at Los Rodeos Airport, now Tenerife North Airport, in the Canary Islands, when 2 massive Boeing 747s, one from KLM and the other from Pan American World Airways, tragically collided on the runway in dense fog, resulting in the loss of 583 lives. What makes this disaster even more haunting is that it wasn't caused by a mechanical failure or bad weather alone, but by a tragic sequence of miscommunication, assumptions, and bad timing that spiraled into the worst-case scenario. At the time, Los Rodeos was never meant to be hosting such a crowd. A terrorist bombing at nearby Gran Canaria Airport had forced dozens of incoming flights to divert to this much smaller, fog-prone airfield. As a result, the runway and taxiways were congested with parked planes and stressed crews, all waiting for clearance to depart. The weather then decided to make things even more complicated by rolling in thick fog, limiting visibility to just a few hundred feet. It was under these already tense and confusing conditions that the KLM and Pan Am flights began preparing for takeoff. Both aircraft were on the same runway. KLM had lined up, waiting to take off, while Pan Am was taxiing ahead, trying to find the right exit. Due to the poor visibility, the crews couldn't see each other, and neither could the control tower. That's where communication became absolutely critical, and unfortunately, where it also began to unravel. The KLM captain, a highly experienced pilot, misunderstood a transmission from air traffic control as a takeoff clearance. Confident he had permission to depart, he powered up the engines and began his takeoff roll. Meanwhile, the Pan Am plane was still taxiing slowly ahead on the same runway, unaware of the impending danger behind them. The result was catastrophic. By the time the Pan Am crew spotted the KLM jet barreling toward them through the fog, there was no time to react. The 2 aircraft collided at high speed, tearing through each other and igniting a massive fireball. The KLM plane became airborne for just a moment before crashing back down, while the Pan Am jet was torn apart. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but the fire and wreckage made rescue efforts incredibly difficult. Only 61 people survived, all from the Pan Am flight. Everyone aboard the KLM aircraft was killed. In the aftermath, investigators were determined to figure out how such a terrible miscommunication could occur. It became clear that a combination of ambiguous radio messages, assumptions by the flight crew, and the lack of visual confirmation led to the disaster. One major issue was the use of non-standard language between pilots and air traffic control. Phrases like, "We are at takeoff," were misinterpreted, and important confirmations weren't repeated or clarified. The aviation industry responded swiftly. One of the most significant outcomes was the global adoption of standard phraseology, a set of clear, concise, and universally understood phrases used in all aviation communication. Pilots and controllers were trained to use precise language, always confirming and repeating instructions. Additionally, the importance of crew resource management, CRM, gained attention, emphasizing teamwork, communication, and assertiveness within the cockpit, regardless of hierarchy. While the Tenerife disaster remains a deeply painful chapter in aviation history, it also became a catalyst for sweeping changes in airline operations and safety culture. The lessons learned have saved countless lives since. Today, commercial aviation is safer than ever, and much of that progress can be traced back to the hard lessons learned on that foggy runway in Tenerife. In the early hours of June 1, 2009, Air France Flight 447 disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean, leaving the world stunned and aviation experts scrambling for answers. The Airbus A330 had departed from Rio de Janeiro en route to Paris, carrying 228 passengers and crew. The flight began routinely, cruising smoothly above the Atlantic under the command of an experienced crew and equipped with modern systems. But in the darkness of night and deep within a remote stretch of ocean, things took a devastating turn. As the aircraft entered a region known for volatile weather near the equator, it encountered a series of towering thunderclouds, common but dangerous features in the intertropical convergence zone. The plane's pitot tubes, which measure airspeed, began to ice over. These small but essential sensors are critical for providing accurate data to the flight computers and pilots. As they became blocked with ice, the airspeed readings turned unreliable, causing the autopilot to disconnect. In that moment, the smooth ride became a high-stakes test of skill and judgment. With the autopilot off, the co-pilot at the controls reacted by pulling the nose of the aircraft upward. This might seem instinctive, but at high altitude, such a move can lead to an aerodynamic stall, a condition where the wings lose lift and the plane begins to fall. The cockpit filled with warning tones and confusing alerts. The stall alarm sounded repeatedly, but the pilots failed to recognize the nature of the problem. The aircraft, instead of leveling out, continued to pitch upward, bleeding speed and lift. For more than 3 minutes, the jet descended in a stalled condition, falling from the sky at a terrifying rate, while the crew struggled to make sense of what was happening. Despite having time and altitude to recover, the lack of clear situational awareness, combined with insufficient training in manual high-altitude stall recovery, sealed the fate of the flight. At 2:14 a.m. UTC, the plane struck the ocean surface with tremendous force, killing all 228 people on board. The wreckage was scattered across the ocean floor, nearly 4,000 meters deep, in one of the most inaccessible regions of the Atlantic. Initial search efforts recovered only a small portion of the debris, and the flight recorders remained lost for nearly 2 years. When they were finally retrieved in 2011, the world learned the grim details of the final moments. The investigation revealed a cascade of errors. The iced pitot tubes were the initial trigger, but it was human error that ultimately caused the crash. The pilot's lack of understanding of the stall, compounded by poor coordination and communication in the cockpit, led to a series of incorrect actions. The aircraft was fully functional and could have been flown to safety, but confusion and misinterpretation of the situation led to a catastrophic outcome. In the aftermath, the aviation industry took several hard lessons to heart. Air France and other airlines revised training protocols, particularly in manual flying skills and high-altitude stall recovery. The design of pitot tubes was improved to better resist icing. Cockpit communication procedures were also reassessed to emphasize clearer roles and more assertive decision-making in emergencies. Air France Flight 447 was a sobering reminder that even the most advanced aircraft are not immune to human vulnerability. It highlighted how, in moments of crisis, technology alone cannot substitute for understanding, experience, and communication. The tragedy reshaped aviation safety, leaving behind a legacy of reforms aimed at preventing such a disaster from ever happening again.